The humid Manila air carried the familiar scent of street food and exhaust fumes as Manny Pacquiao stepped out of his black SUV in front of a modest concrete house in General Santos City. The neighborhood looked exactly as he remembered from his childhood, narrow streets lined with small homes, children playing barefoot in the dusty roads, and the distant sound of roosters crowing despite the afternoon hour. This was where it all began, where dreams were born from nothing but determination and an old man's unwavering belief in a skinny kid who had more heart than technique. Freddie Roach had been more than a trainer to Manny. He had been a father figure, a mentor, and the architect of his legendary career. Now, at 73, Freddie moved slower than before, his hands showing the tremor that had become more pronounced over the years. But his eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had guided Manny through 8 weight divisions and countless battles in the ring. Manny knocked gently on the weathered wooden door, his heart racing with an excitement he hadn't felt in months. When Freddie opened it, wearing his familiar polo shirt and that crooked smile that had comforted Manny through his toughest fights, the champion felt like that eager teenager again, hungry to prove himself to the world. The living room was simple but clean, decorated with faded photographs of their greatest victories together. Freddie's wife, Encarnacion, served them fresh buko juice while they sat on plastic chairs around a small wooden table. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on family, health, and memories of their incredible journey together. But Manny had come with a specific purpose, one that had been weighing on his mind for weeks. He had recently received an invitation that seemed almost surreal. Vasyl Lomachenko, the Ukrainian master technician, had requested a private meeting. Not for a fight, not for business, but simply to meet the legend who had inspired him throughout his amateur and professional career. The meeting was scheduled to take place in Los Angeles, at a neutral gym where they could train together and share their knowledge. As Manny explained the invitation to Freddie, he watched his old coach's weathered face light up with genuine curiosity. Freddie had always been fascinated by technical boxers, and Lomachenko represented the pinnacle of boxing artistry. The Ukrainian's footwork was poetry in motion, his angles were mathematical precision, and his ring IQ was off the charts. It was everything Freddie had tried to instill in Manny, refined to an almost supernatural level. But what made this invitation truly special was Lomachenko's specific request. He wanted to meet not just Manny, but also the man who had crafted the Filipino legend's career. He had studied their partnership for years, analyzing how Freddie had transformed a raw, aggressive fighter into a tactical genius who could adapt to any style. The Ukrainian champion understood that boxing greatness wasn't just about individual talent. It was about the relationship between fighter and trainer, the trust that developed over countless hours in dingy gyms. Manny reached across the table and placed his hand on Freddie's trembling one. The gesture was gentle but firm, conveying years of gratitude and respect. He explained how much it would mean to him if Freddie would join him for this meeting. It wasn't about proving anything or settling any debates about who was better. It was about 2 generations of boxing excellence coming together, sharing their passion for the sweet science. Freddie's eyes moistened slightly as he considered the invitation. His Parkinson's had slowed him down, and he rarely traveled anymore. But the opportunity to meet Lomachenko, to witness this historic encounter between 2 of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters of different eras, was too precious to pass up. The afternoon sun streamed through the small window, casting long shadows across the room as 2 old friends sat in comfortable silence, both understanding that they were about to embark on something truly extraordinary. The Philippine Airlines flight from Manila to Los Angeles stretched endlessly before them, but Manny found himself stealing glances at Freddie throughout the journey. His old coach sat quietly in the business-class seat beside him, occasionally flexing his fingers to combat the stiffness that had become his constant companion. The tremor in Freddie's hands was more noticeable during travel, a reminder of how time had changed the man who once moved with the precision of a surgeon while adjusting Manny's technique between rounds. Manny had insisted on upgrading Freddie's ticket and ensuring every comfort possible for the long flight. He remembered the countless red-eye flights they had taken together during his prime fighting years, cramped coach seats, shared headphones, and Freddie always carrying a worn notebook filled with fight strategies and observations. Now, Watching his mentor struggle with the simple task of opening a water bottle, Manny felt a profound sense of role reversal that both honored and saddened him. The flight attendant, a young Filipina named Isadora, recognized Manny immediately, but maintained professional composure. She had grown up watching his fights with her family, gathering around their small television in Cebu every time the people's champ stepped into the ring. When she discreetly asked for a photo during the meal service, Manny graciously obliged, but his attention remained focused on Freddie, who was methodically reviewing old training footage on his tablet. Freddie had spent the weeks leading up to this trip, studying Lomachenko's fights with the same intensity he once brought to preparing for Manny's biggest battles. He analyzed the Ukrainian's southpaw stance, his incredible ability to change angles mid-combination, and the way he made elite fighters look ordinary through superior positioning and timing. What impressed Freddie most was Lomachenko's restraint, the way he could hurt an opponent but chose instead to outclass them, demonstrating a level of control that spoke to years of disciplined training. As the plane crossed over the Pacific, Manny reflected on the phone conversation that had made this meeting possible. Lomachenko's manager had reached out through mutual connections in the boxing world, explaining that the Ukrainian champion had specifically requested this encounter. It wasn't about publicity or setting up a potential fight. Lomachenko was genuinely interested in learning from the partnership that had produced one of boxing's greatest careers. The request had touched something deep in Manny's heart. Throughout his career, he had always been generous with young fighters, offering advice and encouragement to anyone who sought it. But this was different. Lomachenko wasn't a young prospect looking for guidance. He was an established champion at the peak of his powers, seeking wisdom from a legend who had walked the path before him. Freddie dozed fitfully during the flight, his head occasionally falling to one side before jerking back upright. Manny gently adjusted the small pillow behind his coach's neck, a gesture that felt both natural and profound. How many times had Freddie cared for him during his career, icing his hands after brutal training sessions, staying up late to review fight footage, worrying about his health and future long after the cameras stopped rolling? The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Los Angeles International Airport. Through the small window, the sprawling city stretched out beneath them, a maze of highways and buildings bathed in the golden California sunshine. Somewhere in that vast metropolis, Lomachenko was preparing for their meeting with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him one of the most technically gifted fighters in boxing history. As the plane touched down on American soil, Manny felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded him of his early fighting days. This wasn't about competition or proving superiority. It was about the pure love of boxing and the respect that transcended nationality, language, and fighting styles. Two masters of their craft were about to meet, bridging generations and cultures through their shared passion for the sweet science. The Wild Card Boxing Club in Hollywood buzzed with an unusual energy that Tuesday morning. Word had somehow leaked about the private meeting, and despite strict instructions for privacy, a small crowd of boxing enthusiasts and media personnel had gathered outside the legendary gym. The building itself looked unassuming from the street, a simple storefront wedged between a taco shop and a vintage clothing store, but inside these walls champions had been forged and legends had trained. Manny's black sedan pulled up to the side entrance, away from the curious onlookers. He stepped out first, immediately scanning the area with the instincts of someone who had spent decades in the public eye. The California morning was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the humid heat they had left behind in the Philippines. Freddie emerged more slowly, accepting Manny's steadying hand as he navigated the curb. The older man's movements were deliberate and careful, but his eyes held the same sharp focus that had guided countless fighters to victory. Inside the gym, the familiar sounds of boxing filled the air, the rhythmic pounding of heavy bags, the sharp crack of speed bags, and the shuffle of feet on canvas. The smell of leather, sweat, and liniment created an atmosphere that both men knew intimately. This was their natural habitat, the place where all pretense fell away, and only the pure essence of boxing remained. Aegis Klimas, Lomachenko's manager, greeted them near the entrance with the respectful formality that such an occasion demanded. A tall, distinguished man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, he had been instrumental in orchestrating this meeting. He understood the historical significance of bringing together these two boxing minds, the aggressive, heart-driven style of the Philippines meeting the technical perfection of Ukraine. The gym had been cleared of its usual training sessions for this private encounter. Only essential personnel remained, a few trusted trainers, a photographer to document the moment for posterity, and the gym's owner, who watched from a respectful distance. The main ring stood empty in the center of the space, its canvas pristine and waiting, though this meeting would not involve any sparring or demonstration. Lomachenko had not yet arrived, but his presence could already be felt in the meticulous preparation that had gone into this day. His training equipment was arranged in one corner, speed bags calibrated to his exact specifications, focus mitts worn smooth from countless sessions, and a collection of gloves that told the story of his methodical approach to the sport. Freddie moved slowly around the gym, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. Despite his physical limitations, his mind remained as sharp as ever, analyzing the setup and imagining how Lomachenko might utilize each piece of equipment. He paused at a wall covered with photographs of the gym's most famous alumni, his finger tracing the air near images of fighters he had known and respected throughout his career. Manny found himself drawn to the ring, stepping through the ropes with the fluid motion that had become second nature over decades of competition. Standing in the center of the canvas, he felt the weight of anticipation building around them. This wasn't about proving anything or settling debates about pound-for-pound rankings. This was about the pure love of boxing and the mutual respect that existed between true artists of the sport. The morning light streamed through the gym's windows, casting long shadows across the training area. In a few minutes, Lomachenko would arrive, and two of boxing's greatest minds would meet for the first time. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. This was the kind of encounter that happened perhaps once in a generation, when legends from different eras and cultures came together to share their passion for the sweet science. The anticipation in the air was palpable, electric with the promise of something truly special about to unfold. The gym's front door opened with a soft chime, and the atmosphere immediately shifted. Vasyl Lomachenko entered with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. No fanfare, no entourage, just a man who carried himself with the understated grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He wore simple training gear, black shorts, a plain white t-shirt, and well-worn boxing shoes that had clearly seen countless hours of work. What struck Manny immediately was Lomachenko's eyes. They held the same intensity he had seen in mirrors throughout his own career, the focused gaze of someone who had dedicated their entire existence to perfecting their craft. But there was something else there too, genuine humility and an almost childlike excitement about this meeting that transcended any competitive instincts. Lomachenko's father and longtime trainer, Anatoly, followed closely behind. The elder Lomachenko moved with the measured steps of a man who had spent decades studying the science of boxing, his weathered hands telling the story of countless hours spent holding pads and refining technique. The resemblance between father and son was striking, not just in physical features but in their shared intensity and methodical approach to everything they did. The moment Lomachenko spotted Freddie sitting on a folding chair near the ring, something profound happened. The Ukrainian champion's composed demeanor softened, and he approached the legendary trainer with the reverence of a student meeting his hero. Lomachenko had studied every fight Freddie had cornered, analyzing not just the tactical adjustments, but the emotional connection between trainer and fighter that had produced such extraordinary results. Freddie struggled to stand, his trembling hands gripping the chair's armrests as he pushed himself upright. Lomachenko immediately gestured for him to remain seated, but Freddie was determined to greet this meeting with the respect it deserved. When he finally stood, the two men faced each other, the architect of Manny's legendary career and the current pound-for-pound king who represented the evolution of boxing technique. Manny watched from a few feet away as Lomachenko extended his hand to Freddie, but instead of a simple handshake, the Ukrainian champion gently took both of Freddie's trembling hands in his own. The gesture was so natural, so filled with genuine respect, that it seemed to transcend the language barrier between them. In that moment, Lomachenko wasn't the undefeated champion or the Olympic gold medalist. He was simply a student of the sport, paying homage to one of its greatest teachers. The emotion in the room was palpable. Anatoly Lomachenko stepped forward to greet Freddie as well, and the meeting of these two legendary trainers created a bridge between different eras and philosophies of boxing. Anatoly's approach had always been methodical and scientific, building Vasil's skills from childhood with the precision of an engineer. Freddie's style had been more intuitive, adapting to each fighter's natural abilities and molding them into championship form. Manny felt his throat tighten as he witnessed this exchange. Throughout his career, he had been blessed to work with Freddie, but seeing his mentor receive this level of respect from boxing's current elite reminded him of just how special their partnership had been. Freddie had given everything to Manny's career, sacrificing his own health and comfort to ensure his fighter reached the pinnacle of the sport. Lomachenko's team had prepared a small presentation area where they could sit comfortably and share their experiences. As they moved toward the arranged chairs, Lomachenko naturally positioned himself to assist Freddie, offering his arm for support without making it seem like charity. The Ukrainian's thoughtfulness spoke to his character. This wasn't just about meeting a legend, but about honoring the man who had helped create one. The stage was now set for a conversation that would bridge generations, cultures, and fighting philosophies, all united by their shared love for the beautiful brutality of boxing. The moment that would be remembered forever began when Lomachenko reached into his gym bag and carefully withdrew a worn leather folder. His hands, usually so steady and precise in the ring, trembled slightly as he opened it to reveal its contents. Inside were dozens of printed photographs, fight stills, and newspaper clippings, all documenting Manny and Freddie's greatest moments together. But these weren't just random collection pieces. Each image had been meticulously studied, annotated in Ukrainian script, with tactical notes and observations written in the margins. Freddie's eyes widened as Lomachenko spread the materials on the small table between them. There were photos from the first Oscar de la Hoya fight, images of Freddie adjusting Manny's stance between rounds against Miguel Cotto, and even candid shots of them working the mitts during training camps. What made this collection extraordinary was the level of detail in Lomachenko's analysis. He had studied not just Manny's technique, but the subtle communication between fighter and trainer that had made their partnership legendary. Anatoly Lomachenko pulled out his own folder, revealing pages of handwritten notes in both Ukrainian and broken English. For years, he had used Freddie's training methods as a case study, adapting certain principles to Vasil's development while maintaining their own unique approach. The elder Lomachenko had particular admiration for how Freddie had managed Manny's aggressive nature, channeling raw power into calculated precision without losing the Filipino's natural fighting instincts. As Lomachenko began pointing to specific photographs and explaining his observations, something beautiful happened. Despite the language barrier, the universal language of boxing created a bridge between them. When Lomachenko mimicked Freddie's distinctive way of holding the focus mitts, the old trainer's face lit up with recognition and appreciation. When he demonstrated how he had incorporated one of Freddie's footwork drills into his own training, Freddie nodded, with the satisfaction of a teacher seeing his lessons passed on to a new generation. Manny watched in amazement as Lomachenko pulled out a tablet and showed them video compilations he had created. The Ukrainian had spent countless hours editing together sequences that highlighted the evolution of Manny's style under Freddie's guidance. He had isolated moments where Freddie's corner advice had directly led to tactical adjustments that changed the course of fights. The level of respect and study was overwhelming. But the most emotional moment came when Lomachenko showed them a particular photograph, a candid shot of Freddie embracing Manny after the second fight with Timothy Bradley. In the image, Freddie's face showed pure joy and relief, while Manny looked exhausted but triumphant. Lomachenko had written something in Ukrainian beneath the photo, and when Anatoly translated it, the words hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. The translation revealed that Lomachenko had written about how this single image had inspired him during his own difficult moments in the ring. He had studied the bond between Manny and Freddie, understanding that true boxing greatness wasn't just about individual skill, but about the trust and communication between fighter and trainer. This photograph had hung in his training room for years, serving as a reminder of what was possible when two people dedicated themselves completely to a shared goal. Freddie's composure finally broke. Tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks as the full impact of Lomachenko's tribute hit him. Here was one of the greatest fighters in the world, at the peak of his powers, acknowledging that Freddie's work with Manny had influenced his own journey. The tremor in Freddie's hands seemed to still for a moment as he reached out to touch the photograph, his fingers tracing the image of himself and his greatest pupil. Manny felt his own eyes filling with tears as he witnessed his mentor's emotional response. In that moment, all the sacrifices, all the long hours in dingy gyms, all the worry and dedication that Freddie had poured into his career felt validated in the most profound way possible. The emotional weight of the moment seemed to settle over the entire gym like a warm blanket. Lomachenko, seeing Freddie's tears, reached across the table and gently placed his hand over the older man's trembling fingers. The gesture was so natural, so filled with genuine compassion, that it transcended any cultural or linguistic barriers. In that simple touch, decades of boxing wisdom and respect flowed between two generations of the sport. Anatoly Lomachenko moved closer to his son, his own eyes glistening with moisture as he witnessed this profound exchange. The elder trainer understood better than anyone the sacrifices required to reach the pinnacle of boxing. He had spent his entire life dedicated to perfecting Vassil's technique, just as Freddie had devoted himself to Manny's career. Seeing his son honor another trainer's legacy with such reverence filled him with pride that went beyond any championship or accolade. Manny stood quietly behind Freddie's chair, his hands resting gently on his mentor's shoulders. The physical contact was both protective and supportive, a role reversal that spoke to the deep bond they had forged over the years. Throughout his career, Freddie had been the one offering comfort and guidance during difficult moments. Now, Manny found himself in the position of providing strength to the man who had given him everything. Lomachenko reached into his bag once more and withdrew something that made everyone in the room catch their breath. It was a pair of worn focus mitts, clearly well used and bearing the distinctive markings of countless training sessions. But these weren't just any mitts. They were replicas of the exact pair Freddie had used during Manny's most famous training camps. Lomachenko had commissioned a craftsman in Ukraine to recreate them based on detailed photographs, down to the specific wear patterns and tape markings that Freddie preferred. The Ukrainian champion had brought these mitts not as a gift, but as a request. Through gestures and the few English words he knew, he conveyed his desire to experience what it felt like to hit the same style of mitts that had helped create one of boxing's greatest legends. The request was both humble and profound, a master asking to learn from another master's tools. Freddie's emotional response intensified as he examined the mitts. Every detail was perfect, from the padding density to the strap configuration. Someone had clearly spent months studying his techniques and preferences to create such an accurate reproduction. The fact that Lomachenko had gone to such lengths to honor his methods spoke to a level of respect that few trainers ever received during their lifetimes. With shaking hands, Freddie slowly pulled on the mitts. The familiar weight and feel seemed to energize him, and for a moment, the tremor in his hands appeared to diminish. Muscle memory kicked in as he adjusted the straps and tested the padding, his body remembering thousands of hours spent holding these tools for his fighters. Lomachenko watched intently, studying every movement and adjustment with the focus of a student observing a master craftsman. What happened next was pure magic. Despite his physical limitations, Freddie raised the mitts and assumed his classic stance. Lomachenko approached with reverence, his movements careful and controlled. When he threw his first combination into Freddie's mitts, the sound echoed through the gym with a crispness that spoke to perfect timing and technique. But more than that, it represented a passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. The rhythm they established was hypnotic. Lomachenko's punches were precise and measured, while Freddie's mitt work, despite his condition, still showed flashes of the brilliance that had guided Manny to 8 division titles. Each exchange was a conversation in the universal language of boxing, a dialogue between past and present that honored the sport's greatest traditions. Tears continued to flow freely down Freddie's cheeks, but now they were tears of joy and fulfillment rather than overwhelming emotion. The mitt-work session had awakened something profound in both men. As Lomachenko stepped back from the mitts, his chest rising and falling with controlled breathing, Freddie's eyes held a spark that hadn't been there in months. The brief exchange had reminded him of who he was beneath the tremors and physical limitations. He was still one of boxing's greatest teachers, and his knowledge remained as sharp as ever. Manny watched in amazement as his old coach began moving around the training area with renewed energy. Freddie's steps were still careful and measured, but there was purpose in his movement now, a sense of mission that the meeting with Lomachenko had reignited. The Ukrainian champion followed respectfully, his attention completely focused on every gesture and movement that Freddie made. What unfolded next was an impromptu masterclass that no amount of money could have purchased. Freddie began demonstrating the subtle techniques he had developed over decades of training champions. Using his trembling hands, he showed Lomachenko how he had taught Manny to create angles that seemed impossible, how to generate power from positions that appeared defensively compromised, and how to read an opponent's intentions through the smallest physical tells. Lomachenko absorbed every lesson with the intensity of a devoted student. His own father, Anatoly, watched with fascination as Freddie revealed training secrets that had never been documented or shared publicly. These were the intimate details of championship preparation, the small adjustments and mental approaches that separated good fighters from legends. The Ukrainian champion began incorporating some of Freddie's suggestions into his own shadowboxing, his movements becoming even more fluid and precise. The photographer present captured frame after frame of this historic exchange, understanding that he was documenting something truly special. The images showed two masters of their craft sharing knowledge across cultural and generational boundaries, united by their love for boxing's purest elements. In one particularly striking photo, Freddie's weathered hands were guiding Lomachenko's stance, while Manny looked on with obvious pride and emotion. As the session continued, other people in the gym began to take notice. Word had somehow spread despite the attempts at privacy, and a small group of respected boxing figures had quietly gathered to witness this unprecedented meeting. Among them were former champions, veteran trainers, and boxing journalists who understood the historical significance of what they were seeing. They maintained a respectful distance, but their presence added to the gravity of the moment. Lomachenko's respect for Freddie seemed to grow with each passing minute. The Ukrainian champion had always been known for his humility and willingness to learn, but his deference to the older trainer went beyond mere politeness. He genuinely recognized that he was in the presence of someone who had achieved something he was still pursuing, the creation of a truly transcendent boxing legacy through the development of another human being. The emotional climax came when Lomachenko asked Freddie to show him the specific mitt combination that had become synonymous with Manny's training camps. It was a complex sequence that required perfect timing and coordination between trainer and fighter, one that had been featured in countless documentaries and training videos. Despite his physical limitations, Freddie managed to execute the combination with Lomachenko, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed almost choreographed. Manny felt overwhelmed watching his current self and his past converge in this beautiful moment. Lomachenko represented everything that modern boxing could achieve through technical perfection and scientific training methods. Freddie embodied the old-school wisdom and intuitive understanding that had built the sport's greatest legends. Seeing them work together was like watching different eras of boxing history merge into something entirely new and special. The session concluded with both men embracing, their mutual respect having deepened into something approaching genuine affection. The language barrier had proven irrelevant when faced with their shared passion and understanding of boxing's deeper truths. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows through the gym's windows, the historic meeting slowly drew to its natural conclusion. The energy in the room had transformed from nervous anticipation to profound satisfaction, as if everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. The simple act of bringing together two boxing legends had created ripples that would extend far beyond this single day. Lomachenko carefully packed away his collection of photographs and notes, but not before asking Freddie to sign several of the images. The Ukrainian champion's hands were steady, as he held each photo for the older trainer, patiently waiting as Freddie's trembling fingers worked to create legible signatures. Each autograph was a struggle, but Freddie was determined to complete this final gesture of respect and connection. The most touching moment came when Lomachenko presented Freddie with a gift that no one had expected. From his bag he withdrew a small wooden box, handcrafted in Ukraine with intricate traditional designs carved into its surface. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a miniature replica of an Olympic gold medal, not one of Lomachenko's own, but a specially commissioned piece that honored Freddie's contribution to boxing through his work with Manny. The inscription on the medal was written in both English and Ukrainian, recognizing Freddie as a master builder of champions. The gesture was so unexpected and heartfelt that it left everyone in the room speechless. Freddie held the small medal in his shaking hands, his eyes once again filling with tears as he comprehended the depth of respect that Lomachenko had shown him. Manny felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him as he watched his mentor receive this recognition. Throughout Freddie's career, the trainer had always remained in the background, content to let his fighters receive the glory while he worked tirelessly behind the scenes. To see him honored in this way by one of boxing's current elite was deeply moving and long overdue. As they prepared to leave, Lomachenko made one final request that surprised everyone. He asked if he could take a photograph with both Manny and Freddie, not for publicity or social media, but for his own personal collection. The three men positioned themselves near the ring where they had shared so much knowledge and emotion, with Freddie seated in the center, while Manny and Lomachenko stood on either side, their hands resting gently on the older man's shoulders. The photographer captured multiple frames of this historic trio, but the most powerful image was one where all three men were looking directly at the camera with expressions of genuine contentment and mutual respect. It was a photograph that would eventually find its way into boxing museums and history books, representing a moment when the sport's past, present, and future converged in perfect harmony. The farewell was emotional, but not sad. Lomachenko embraced Freddie with the tenderness of a grandson saying goodbye to a beloved grandfather, while Anatoly shook hands with both Manny and Freddie, his own eyes moist with emotion. The Ukrainian team had clearly been as moved by this experience as their hosts, understanding that they had been part of something truly special. As Manny helped Freddie toward their waiting car, the older trainer moved with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there in months. The meeting had reinvigorated something essential in his spirit, reminding him that his life's work had meaning that extended far beyond any single fighter or championship. His legacy lived on in the respect of champions like Lomachenko, in the techniques that continued to be passed down through generations, and in the countless lives he had touched throughout his career. The drive back to their hotel was quiet, but it was the comfortable silence of two men who had shared something profound together. As the California landscape passed by their windows, both Manny and Freddie understood that this day would remain with them forever. A perfect reminder of why they had fallen in love with boxing in the first place.